We know that what's going on in this country is just not right.
The former First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, takes on President Trump at the Democratic National Convention. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The Democratic Party is holding a virtual convention this week after scrapping plans for a major gathering in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because of fears over coronavirus. Opening night saw some of the party's biggest names address the event from locations across the United States, and it was highlighted by former First Lady Michelle Obama, who launched a blistering attack on President Trump.
So let me be as honest and clear as I possibly can. Donald Trump is the wrong president for our country. He has had more than enough time to prove that he can do the job, but he is clearly in over his head. He cannot meet this moment. He simply cannot be who we need him to be for us. It is what it is.
Well, President Trump has responded, and we will get to that shortly with our panel. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Ameshia Cross. She is a Democratic strategist and commentator. With us, too, from New York is Amy Holmes. She is a writer for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and a columnist for the Swiss weekly Die Weltwoche. Also with us via Skype from Washington, D.C. is Joel Rubin. He is a Democratic Party strategist and commentator. And joining us, too, from Pennsylvania is Michael Johns. He is a conservative commentator and political analyst. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Ameshia, let me start with you. Lots of excitement in the media over what Michelle Obama had to say. Lots of media posts as well on social media. She went directly after President Trump. But was she effective?
Absolutely. I believe that former First Lady Michelle Obama really drove home the risk associated with not coming out and voting in November, with allowing President Trump to have another 4 years and what that next 4 years would look like. She clearly laid out exactly why President Trump is such a detriment to this country, not only because of his lack of empathy and his failures of character, but also because he is leading the nation down the wrong path in several different ways. And I think that she did not hold back any punches when it came to coming for Donald Trump directly, but also, again, setting the stage for what an America could look like and the dangerous path that we happen to be down right now, and the fact that Donald Trump is not going to get any better. People sometimes keep expecting time after time for him to meet the moment, and thus far we have not seen that occur. And right now we're in this national crisis. We have a global pandemic, and this president has proven yet again that he is not the man for the moment. He is not the man who can address crises. He's not the man who deserves to be president, and he is the most unpresidential person we have ever had in that seat.
Amy Holmes, let's listen to some of what Michelle Obama had to say, making the case against Trump and for Joe Biden.
So if you take one thing from my words tonight, it is this. If you think things cannot possibly get worse, trust me, they can and they will if we don't make a change in this election. If we have any hope of ending this chaos, we have got to vote for Joe Biden like our lives depend on it.
Amy, this was not some veiled attack on Donald Trump. This was a full frontal attack. She drew a sharp contrast between Trump and Biden, using empathy, using values. Did it work?
I think that it was effective, particularly, of course, for Democratic audiences, but also potentially for some of those suburban moms, suburban women who have been disturbed by Donald Trump's erratic, boisterous, and over-the-top behavior as President of the United States. But Anand, I'll tell you, yesterday I interviewed James Carville for Die Weltwoche to ask him what he was going to be looking for last night and through the week for the Democratic convention. And he told me that he hoped that it would not be 4 nights of Trump bashing, that it would not be an anti-Trump frenzy, as he put it. And he said, frankly, we talked way too much about Trump in 2016 and that it wasn't helpful, and that Democrats really need to focus on their message positive moving forward. And he suggested, let's look at the 2018 playbook when Democrats were talking about health care, when they were talking about what they were going to do for America, not necessarily running entirely against Donald Trump. And it was hugely successful. So in his words, let's use that playbook all over again. So I think there is a danger, Carville pointed it out, for talking too much about Trump and not enough about the Democratic agenda.
Ameshia, let me get a quick response to you on that. I mean, it's all very well listening to the soaring rhetoric bashing Trump, but we also need to listen to what policy prescriptions the Democrats have to fix what's wrong in this country.
I think if people didn't see those two things showcased together last night, then they weren't watching the same Democratic National Convention I was. The Democrats spent the majority of the night going over what a policy platform would look like to build back America. They showcased diversity and inclusion. They showcased exactly what the coronavirus is doing to Americans and why we need to move forward into a better future. I think that you can do both of those things at the same time. You can't talk about COVID-19 and the mismanagement of this country without talking about Trump at the helm of it all. So I do think you can do that, but you can also talk about what the Democratic plans are moving forward, and they successfully did both.
Joel, Rubin, of course, President Trump was at the receiving end of all this criticism. There has been a response from him. He did push back against what Michelle Obama had to say. Let's listen.
I thought it was a very divisive speech, extremely divisive. I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for Barack Obama. See, we're standing in the White House. I wouldn't be in the White House except for Barack Obama because they did a bad job, Biden and Obama.
Joel, could Michelle Obama have gone too far? Could this backfire?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump wouldn't have even been there if the Russians hadn't put him there, as we're finding out today from the Senate Intelligence Committee report about collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence. So putting that to the side, no, he has no legs to stand on, and no, he should not be attacking Michelle Obama for a person who said that he wants to protect the housewives of the suburbs, as an example. Michelle Obama is incredibly popular across America, and in particular with women. And today, on the 100th anniversary of the women's suffrage movement succeeding, he is attacking one of the most popular and prominent women in America. It's just beneath the office. This is why he has to go. This is why Democrats do focus on him as a major problem in our society. We have an agenda, and we can talk about that, but we really have to uncork the bottleneck right now in our government, and that is Donald Trump sitting at the apex of it and harming Americans, costing lives, costing treasure, and leading us into a ditch. And that's why Democrats do need to talk about him, as well as putting our program forward.
Michael Johns, what is your assessment of these attacks on Donald Trump, which came not only from Michelle Obama, but also came from a Republican, John Kasich, a former presidential candidate? What did you make of it?
I thought they seemed incredibly vague. I mean, what we didn't hear a lot about last night was, well, firstly, the name Joe Biden, which, according to Rasmussen polls, 59% of whom believe could not complete even the first 4 years of a term. So that was one issue. And then secondly, we didn't really hear any of the policy specifics they're actually going to bring. The fact that they're going to raise taxes on 80% of the American people up to $2.4 trillion. Didn't hear anything about their open border policy and the ramifications that would have for illegal aliens in this country and all the ramifications that would stem from that. Didn't hear anything about their plans to cut or even eliminate police funding.
It's because none of that is accurate. None of that is accurate.
Well, it is accurate.
Not
they had a spokesperson.
Not a part of the party.
They had a spokesperson.
One at a time.
They had a spokesperson last night.
Let Michael finish. Michael, go ahead.
They had a spokesperson in one of their caucuses last night, their LGBT caucus, who actually called for the complete abolishment of police funding. So that clearly is part of their issue. They have not condemned the violence in the streets. They have not called on their fellow Democrat mayors that are allowing this violence to occur to intervene and stop it. Clearly, they put the political advantage that they perceive to be obtaining from it far above the ramifications of the millions of dollars of damage and harm that they're doing to the individuals of these cities that are under Democrat reign. Didn't hear anything about the Green New Deal. Didn't hear anything about the Green New Deal last night. That cost 10 million energy jobs and impose all kinds of burdens on the American economy.
All right, Michael.
Didn't hear anything, finally, about the fact that Joe Biden called the China travel ban which kept infected individuals out of this country, racist and xenophobic, and presumably would not have imposed that ban.
Okay.
So it's very easy to blame this president, but the fact is it would have been a lot worse under Joe Biden's leadership.
All right, Joel,
That's,
go ahead, very quickly.
Incredible. Sure. Well, I think that it's clear that Donald Trump led us into trillion-dollar annual deficits before coronavirus hit.
Well, pause
we
on
were
that.
heading
Pause
into a
on that.
recession.
Pause on
One
that.
moment.
You got your time.
One moment, Michael.
We were in trillion-dollar deficit last year because of the tax cuts for the wealthy that you seem to enjoy, that you think are good for the American economy.
They cut taxes on 82% of the
excuse me,
workers.
trillion dollar deficit.
7 million
I thought that you're a fiscally responsible person, but $1 trillion deficit from tax cuts blew up our budget before the crisis hit. And the mismanagement of this crisis is why we're in this situation right now.
Okay.
Anand, one thing, hold on,
very hard.
Hold on.
Screamed at.
Okay, Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing that we're also overlooking in this discussion, which is how many people stuck in there to watch this first virtual Democratic convention.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of commentary on both sides of the aisle that it was like one long infomercial. It was intending to be intimate with all of these sort of, intimate personal testimonials. But I kept waiting for Eva Longoria to say, for just $19.99 a month, operators are standing by. I think we're really seeing,
I want to get to
Ameshia.
We
How
don't want
a
to
live
put everybody.
convention
We don't want to
makes
put everybody
a live
in
convention.
Okay,
Hold
listen,
on, let me finish, please.
I need to go around the table. I need to bring Ameshia into this conversation. Ameshia.
But I got cut off entirely before I even was able to speak.
Okay, I'll get to you, Joel.
I wasn't able to speak.
I will get to you, Joel. I just want to get to Ameshia for a moment and talk about one of the other big speakers who was there last night, and that was the former presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. He laid out the challenges that Democrats will face in November. Let's listen to what he said.
The future of our democracy is at stake. The future of our economy is at stake. The future of our planet is at stake. We must come together, defeat Donald Trump, and elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as our next president and vice president.
Ameshia, one of the big challenges for the Democrats is to persuade many Sanders supporters, progressives, young people, to go out and vote. Did he make an effective argument yesterday that would motivate them to get up and go out and vote?
Bernie Sanders did exactly what Bernie Sanders came to do and what I think the progressives would have to do, because the Democratic Party has its moderate base. It has its more leftist progressives. It also has this newer group of voters who don't necessarily identify as either of those, but tend to support more progressive policies. And I think that it matters for the party to be able to bring both of those together, because there do happen to be wedges, particularly when we're talking about age demographics of members of the party. And for people who feel like because Joe Biden doesn't necessarily align with Bernie Sanders on a lot of his policy priorities, it showed a lot of not only maturity, but also an extent of raising your hand, sticking out your hand to showcase that I'm willing to cross over into this side and help you to develop these policies that young people want to see. The thing that's preventing young people from voting and will prevent young people from voting in November is not a fraction within the Democratic Party. It is going to be what Donald Trump is doing to the U.S. Postal Service, as well as what we're seeing in terms of the push against the voting system we currently have, with the long wait times, with 65-year-old poll workers who are going to call out because of COVID-19. I'm more worried about Donald Trump's I want to get our elections than I am young people just not showing up.
Yeah, I do want to get to the challenges that will be there on election day. Joel, let me allow you to finish what you were saying.
Sure. First and foremost, the Democrats, we actually believe in science. We don't want to stick thousands of people in an arena like the president did in Tulsa and get people killed like Herman Cain, who passed because he got COVID at that Tulsa rally. So we have a virtual campaign to actually protect our people and the American people. And a 2-hour-a-night part of that is the public display and the public speeches. And I don't think anybody should be mocking the idea that we're doing this virtually. If they'd rather people risk their health, just like the president is saying, risk your life to go vote. That's not the way to do it. You know what? I have to say that the failure to I'm sorry, sir.
No, but
Michael, one moment. I will get to you, Michael. One moment.
The failure to stop interrupting in an overt way demonstrates how nervous you are about this election.
All right.
It demonstrates how penetrating the arguments were last night. that
Okay.
you do not have an argument, so you have to shout over people.
Okay, I want to get, Michael, I will come to you in a moment, but I want to get back to Amy. Amy, Republicans, including the president, are portraying Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as two people who will be implementing far left policies, which is sort of bizarre because Joe Biden doesn't even embrace Medicare for all, which is, you know, one of the progressives' chief something that they want. The GOP also points to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So is the playbook here to try and portray the Democrats as not being realistic, of being so far left that they would not be acceptable to the electorate?
Well, that's certainly the playbook, and trying to frame the Democratic ticket as to the left. And I think there's a problem that we saw that, you know, came up last night, that on the one hand, you had Bernie Sanders saying that many of the ideas that he championed just a few years ago that seemed, quote unquote, radical, and he used the word radical, are now in the mainstream. And then also at last night's convention, you had former Ohio Governor John Kasich saying that Joe Biden would never be pulled to the left and that nobody pushes Joe around. So I think what you saw last night was an attempt to try to blur those distinctions by focusing on issues of character. You heard over and over about decency, empathy, you know, those buzzwords that then distract you from the fact that there really is a real tension in the Democratic Party between the left and efforts to pull him to the left, and even boasting that they've pulled him to the left, versus you know, Joe Biden and John Kasich and others of saying, no, he's really down the middle. But to Joel's point, I was not suggesting that Democrats should have a huge convention hall and try to, you know, get people, or risk get people getting ill. My point is that we do see the difference between the pageantry and the energy of a convention, in, you know, a live convention versus a virtual one. And when people were talking about this might be the future, I think a lot of people would like to see this in the rear view mirror.
Yeah, but you agree that they didn't have that choice this time around, did they?
Well, no, not exactly, Anand. There are other ways you can approach trying to program television, and the Zoom boxes, that was, you know, it was an experiment, and I think Republican campaign strategists are watching very carefully to try to learn lessons to inject more energy next week.
Okay, Michael Johns, I'm going to talk quickly about the polling. President Trump is trailing Biden in polling numbers nationally and in several key states. The president is out there. He's campaigning. He's doing live campaigning. Does that indicate that he thinks he's in trouble? He needs to campaign?
No, I think we're in election season that calls for campaigning. And, you know, he's going to put a lot of attention into some states that he won in 2016, is going to have to win again. And I think his message up until January was one of incredible success. Over 7 million jobs created, wages beginning to rise, restructured trade agreements, progress in border security, you know, a bunch of foreign policy victories out of this flawed Iran agreement. And, you know, really, I think also it's the fact that Biden ended up being the nominee after a point, you know, it's almost easy to forget that we were at a point earlier in that primary where it looked inconceivable that he would win, that I really think we're going to be able to reflect back on the flawed 8 years of the Obama years. I think the president's exactly right. He would not be in the White House had it not been for Obama and Biden. It was a complete repudiation of the neglect of the middle-class voters of this country, the forgotten man and woman, and that's what this election will be about.
All right, Joel Rubin, later this week we're going to be hearing from former President Bill Clinton. Will that help Biden? Because as we are fully aware, Bill Clinton has a very checkered history of being in the White House, not most of it actually being very negative.
Well, President Clinton is a key figure in the Democratic Party, and clearly he's going to have a message that speaks to Americans about the economic progress on his watch, about the kind of American role in the world that we want to have. And I think we need to remember that, going back to the earlier discussion, that last night demonstrated the big tent that the Democrats have. We're not insecure about having diversity in our ranks or having debate, that it's actually a sign of strength when we have a leader in Joe Biden who can deal with the left and the right and get support from a broad coalition. Bill Clinton fits into that. He's a more conservative Democrat than the Sanders wing likes. And so there's always going to be differences of opinion, but we're a big tent. And I think we're going to see that again tonight with him and AOC on the stage and a variety of rising stars as well.
Right, AmeshiaCross, Kamala Harris, and there's been a lot of excitement over her choice as the vice presidential nominee. She will also be speaking at the convention later this week. There was a very critical piece in Jacobin magazine which said, among other things, and I'm going to read this to you, it said that this convention is taking place in the midst of what may be the largest political protest movement in U.S. history, driven by rage at police brutality and mass incarceration and demands for racial justice. And yet, the piece says, the DNC's speaking roster is stacked with the very people who created that system and turned it on poor, predominantly non-white Americans.
It's a powerful piece. I will say that. But I will also say that, and I've said this on this show before, we have to look at everything in context and in terms of time. In the 80s, in the early 90s, there was a grave push to rid inner city streets of crack cocaine and the epidemic that seemed to not be controlled. It was an era in which, unlike today, where we see in white communities, there is a push towards mental health support services. There is a push towards understanding people who have opioid addictions. What we did in the 80s and 90s and what was propagated for communities of color was penalization, was imprisonment, was these very, very strict laws and regulations that were largely pushed by Republicans that Democrats supported, but Democrats would not have been able to get in office if they had.
Let me ask you this,
these
Ameshia.
were also, I'm not finished, though. These were also supported by Congressional Black Caucus members and African-American pastors across this country.
All right, let me
because
ask you.
people, quite frankly, got tired of seeing dead babies and dead people in their streets with needles in their arms. That is what was facts in the 80s and 90s.
I get your point. I hear it. But what I'm saying is, shouldn't the Democratic leadership, especially Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, come out unequivocally say now, we made a mistake, we're sorry, we're going to implement policies that's going to reverse that?
They have addressed unintended consequences, and they have talked about criminal justice reform and moving towards this new future and having an understanding across this country of what those policies did. And I think that that's something that they will reiterate on the stage as we continue to go through the Democratic convention.
Okay, Amy Holmes, there was a young woman who was on the convention, addressed the convention. She lost her dad to coronavirus. She gave a very emotional address on Monday and directly blamed President Trump for the death of her dad. Let's listen to what she had to say.
And after 5 agonizing days, he died alone in the ICU with a nurse holding his hand. My dad was a healthy 65-year-old. His only pre-existing condition was trusting Donald Trump, and for that, he paid with his life.
So, Amy, as we are aware, 171,000 people, more than 171,000 have lost their lives. If this election is a referendum on how Donald Trump has handled this pandemic, is he in serious trouble?
Well, I think he is, and it's not just the lives that are lost, but the economic ramifications, which is why the Trump campaign is actually trying to move the conversation over to discussions of the economy, because that's one area where he still leads Joe Biden in terms of trust in handling the economy. But I think also, Anand, a lot of people watching the coronavirus epidemic, the pandemic unfold, the economic consequences, are also looking at their local leadership. I'm here in New York City, where Governor Cuomo, even the New York Times, has written lengthy investigative pieces of how the governor's decisions or lack of decisions, lack of leadership has led to the New York crisis, and particularly in retirement homes where he allowed and in fact directed COVID positive patients to go into those environments and then spread this fatal, deadly disease among all of these older people. So I think for most Americans, they can see the complexity of this, and that they also are looking to their local leadership, city and state, for decision making and leadership on COVID.
But ultimately, they're going to be looking at President Trump, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you say ultimately, but for me, ultimately is when I walk out of my apartment here in New York City, am I going to get COVID from a person on the subway? And that's a decision that was made at the city and the state level. We just had our subways cleaned for the first time ever because of COVID, and even that was late. Bill de Blasio, he led marches in Chinatown saying we need to keep the businesses open because he didn't take it seriously that the coronavirus was a real threat to the New York City community.
Joel Rubin, looking ahead.
Let me add in on that, though, because I live in Maryland, and we have a Republican governor who's been very critical of Donald Trump in blocking the governor's ability to acquire protective equipment, to get the testing capacity, to have a national strategy and clear guidelines on how to return. So, yes, it's a national issue. This virus spreads across state borders. If you don't have a leader in the White House organizing and directing in a way that is cohesive, coherent, and science-based, you're going to fail, and we're failing
Okay.
as a result.
Joe, I want to ask you about something else, Joe. President Trump is out on the road. He's campaigning. Does that put any pressure on Joe Biden to get out of the basement?
Well, certainly Joe Biden is not just in the basement. I think that's a little extreme. But Donald Trump is out campaigning. Let's see what happens. Joe Biden's team has been incredibly engaged. We're getting tremendous amounts of new voters where our engagements across the board electronically are strong. So I think we'll see. You know, Joe Biden believes in science. Donald Trump has done these rallies and people have gotten sick from them.
Okay, Michael Jones, what does President Trump have to do does he have to get new voters?
I think he has to continue to communicate the message. It's appealing to every voting American, and he should be able to do that. He had a great track record, up to date. I don't think there's anything for him to be ashamed about in the management of this coronavirus. The biggest decision was the travel ban, supported by this president, put in place by this president.
Michael, that's not what the American people think. Poll after poll, in fact, it's 70% to 80% of Americans say that he bungled it.
If people are frustrated, if people are going to point, but well, let me just say this in support of what you said. I believe, and I think this president believes, that they're going to look for national leadership in this crisis, and they don't want to hear that it's governors' responsibilities. They don't, and they probably don't even really want to hear that this was allowed to escape from China at this point. But there's only so much that a president can do, and the most important decisions that needed to be made, he made. One final point. This idea that the Democrat Party is some party of science. I don't know what that even means when they are literally
the president in public for months was saying that
one moment, Joel.
You need to be you need to be consistent. If you're calling for this social distancing, then call your Marxist base off the streets. You can't be simultaneously encouraging that and discouraging individuals from going to church services.
That's not the spread of the virus.
Okay, Ameshia.
Then call it, say
all right.
Or don't,
I'm running out of time. Michael. I've got to get this one question to Ameshia Cross. Ameshia, when the convention's out of the way, how important will the debates be? Very quickly.
The debates are going to be extremely important. I think that they are going to really showcase what people want to hear the most: a direct, in-your-face response from the Democrats and the Republican side around the issues that matter to Americans the most. The DNC and the RNC are largely insider ball. The debates are things that people actually want to see and will be paying very close attention to.
Right, and we'll be hearing more about policies there as well. That's all we have time for. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks for joining us on yet another edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu. Thanks for watching.